the app is mostly done as far as the things that I wanted to show. I mean, there's a lot of bugs in here as far as like revalidating data, cached stale data, and some of the hooks that we have. I mean, and those are just the ones I know about. So I'm sure there's more. As extra credit, go find all the bugs and get rid of them and see how far that takes you. So what we'll do now, though, is get this thing ready for production. And to do that, it's probably wise just to probably, write some tests. So I mean, this is so bleeding edge right now, writing tests for anything in Next.js 13 that there's not even a documentation on how to do it. Like, you can't even look this up. So this is literally just me banging my head against the wall for about 2 weeks trying to figure out how to do tests. This is what I figured out. So I will show you how to write some tests for server components and things like that. And then we'll attempt to get this thing deployed. We'll see what happens. I say attempt because we might have troubles with the in-memory vector store. So I don't know. We'll see. Everything else should be fine. Okay, so to write some tests, we need a bunch of stuff. And when I say a bunch of stuff, I mean a bunch of stuff. So a few of the things we need to download. Anyone ever used a tool called Vite? V-I-T-E? Okay. We'll be using Vitest to do the test, which is like an abstraction on, it like uses Jest, but it's not Jest, and it's using the Vite compiler and not Webpack. So we'll be using that, but there's just a bunch of stuff that we have to install. So we need to install this library called testing library. So we'll do that. So I'm going to say npm install at testing library. Oh, sorry, testing dash library. And then we want /JS DOM, I believe. There's also another one for React. So I'm just going to copy that. We want the one for React /React. We want Vitest or Vitest. Vitest? Probably Vitest. Vitest. I think that's what it's called. Vitest. We have to download a plugin for that. So that one's going to be at Vite.js /plugin-react-swc. SWC is the compiler that Next.js uses to compile itself. We got a plugin for that so that Vite can tie into it. There's also a thought there was more. Oh, no, there's more. Let me see. Oh yeah, JS DOM. JS DOM is like, it's like a mock for the real DOM, but in Node. So you can use the real DOM in Node. It doesn't do anything. It just makes it so your code works. So you can render client-side components in the server. It's a JavaScript representation of the DOM, JS DOM. Makes sense. And I think that's it. Just want to make sure. Okay, I think that's it. So we'll install these. You could probably just do save dev on them. Save -dev.
Is that?
You don't have to do save dev. I'm just doing it. It's --save -dev.
I just mean that first testing library, JS DOM. Yeah, it's supposed to be Jest.
Oh, it's Jest. Sorry.
The testing library.
Oh, there it is.
Jest something.
There we go. Oh, it still doesn't like testing library. It is. Oh, it's just -dom. Okay. And they really know how to make these names. Okay, so we got that. First thing we need to do is we need to extend our TS config to support this. So what we'll do is we'll make a new TS config just for our test on our root. And I'm going to do that. I'm just going to make, if you're using TypeScript, if you're not using TypeScript, this is fine. But I'm just going to say tsconfig.node.json. That's because our tests are going to run in a different runtime and then which our code runs in. 2 different runtimes. So we need a different, like it's going to pull in some of the same files, but those files are going to be executed differently by a different build system than what the build system that Next.js is using. It's just it's literally the equivalent if you just took a random JavaScript file right now and try to run it in the terminal with Node. It's just going to run in that runtime and outside of the context of Next.js. So anything that's specific to your Next.js project, like some of these paths or how to handle CSS files, that would just break in any other runtime because it's not set up for that. So we'll make this config right here. And basically it's just going to set up a Vite environment for us. So we're just going to interact with the compiler here. Do ES next for the modules. Module resolution is a bundler. What does all this mean? This is just telling it like what type of module system we're using. This is telling it how to resolve the modules, whether it's like the bundler, whether it's like the native environment like Node. In this case, the bundler. Let the bundler do it. Vite being the bundler probably. Allows synthetic default imports. This has something to do with composability between CommonJS and ECMAScript modules so they can interop with each other. So you can create these fake imports. There's nothing you would have to do. This is just allowing something to happen. And then some config file that we haven't made yet. We'll include that in a minute. Next thing we need to do is go to the original TS config, and at the bottom, we just need to add a references path to point to that new TS config. It's kind of like an extending. So that way, when we use the new TS config, it's also like getting the benefit of this, because if we're testing some of our Next.js components and files, we still want those to work as far as TypeScript is concerned. So we need this config as well. So we're just going to reference it. Okay. Now we're going to make our Vite config. So we'll do that. It's just called viteconfig.ts on the root. Vite.config.ts like that. And we're just going to import a few things. We're going to import define config. And we're going to import React from the SWC plugin, like so. And then from here, we're just going to set up this config specifically for the test, which is probably different from another Vite config that you might have used. So we're going to use this React SWC plugin here in the plugins array. And then we're going to say these are the test files we want you to look for. So anything inside of a folder called __test__, or any file that has a .spec or .test in it. Those are test files. Use globals, yes. Environment is JS DOM. Is there a file you want to run before the test run to set those tests up? Yes, we're going to run a file called setup test. We're going to make that file. And then do you want to reset the mocks before each test runs? Yes, please do that. That way we don't have to do it ourselves. If you've written tests, you know that it's better to have stateless tests than it is to have stateful tests. You don't want like running one test that puts stuff in the database and then the next test depends on the previous test running and stuff being in the database. Like, good luck. Good luck with that. Same thing is true for mocks. Just reset the mocks.
This is maybe not a fair question to ask. Apologies. But do you know if the gnarliness of setting up Vite, even though there's already TurboPack, et cetera, just to run the tests, is that just purely because the app router is still kind of in flight and an experimental feature?
I think it's less about the app router and more just about server components. Like, it's mostly that. Like, it's so new. And Next.js is the only framework that's React has support for server components, but setting up server components in React is not as simple as setting up server components in Next.js. So no one who needs testing is using it right now, right? Like the people who need testing are like enterprise people or people at bigger teams or people who have teams. So those people really need testing. They're not using server components yet. So I think it's going to be a minute before we see some of that. And, a lot of the tooling is still being updated. But yeah, it's mostly just because of server-side components. Like, it's not something like most of the time when you render a component in like a Vite or a JS DOM or something like that, it's synchronous. You can just render it and it's done. Okay, not now, because those functions can call data server side, and then those server side functions have dependencies, and then all this other stuff. So it's mostly because of that. That's where I was banging my head up against the wall. I'm like, and then when I got the solution, I was like, oh, this makes sense. All right, we are getting somewhere. The next thing we want to do is create a file called setup test, TS, on the root. It's literally just going to do this one thing. Just make sure it's just the same file here, same name. Mine is setup tests, plural. So setup tests.ts. I'm going to paste that here. So in a TypeScript file, this is basically, it's not only just a comment, but you can see it's like highlighted differently to a regular comment because it's telling the TypeScript compiler that there are some types located here, like use those. That's basically what it's saying. And then we're just going to import the JS DOM, which is going to initialize. This is creating the JS DOM environment. This is, you can do, again, the JS DOM environment is like a mock of the browser. So the React components think that they're in the browser, because they have access to the same things. They have access to something called window. They have access to document. They have access to the same stuff you would have in a DOM. They just don't do anything.